How have you seen a person's life be ruined in a single day? Watched a kid get an underage alcohol violation. Wouldn't normally be a life ruiner, but he and I were both college students at a university that had been on the news a lot for the drinking party culture. The culture has been the same since the 70s, but they didn't like the bad press, so they cracked down. Like 2 months before this happened, they instituted a new policy. It used to be that you would deal with the legal implications, then they would make you go to an alcohol education program, and you wouldn't be able to study abroad. Now, they suspend you for the rest of the semester, make you move out if you live on campus, and they cancel any financial aid the school is providing. I didn't know him well, but I do know that he, like me, had student loans on top of a generous financial aid package, and because of the aid program we were in, it's unlikely he could afford to come back without the financial aid package from the school. Man came in to rob the bar I was drinking in. Bartender told him to get ducked. Man shot him twice in the crotch and walked out. We were standing on a downtown corner watching 4th of July parade when we saw the parents of one of the players on a soccer team I coached talk to someone and began running like hell through the crowd with panic-stricken faces. Someone came to our door later and told us the Matt, their 10-year-old son, had jumped off a float to get some candy thrown by someone on another float and had tripped. The float he was on ran over his head, killing him. Our son was on the same float and hadn't gotten home yet. One of the most depressing moments in my life. The parents were never the same. The people on floats in our town never threw candy again. I think of Matt every 4th of July. I know a man whose car was sandwiched between two semis, killing his wife and all 3 of their children instantly. Somehow he walked away with only a broken arm, but I'm pretty sure he wishes he hadn't. My friend's husband produced and consumed child pronoun, including some photos of their children and nephews. She found out when DHS raided their apartment. It tore her life apart. She's doing well now, though. Divorced, obviously, and he no longer has any parental rights. She's still struggling to help her kids process the whole thing. My friend was getting ready for work when the FBI came with a search warrant and took her husband's PC. There was child pronoun, and he swore he had no idea. He had gotten a bunch of pronoun and that was just apparently included. She believed him and stood up for him. Then they showed her a clip from their guest shower of her young niece and his dumbass face is at the start as he adjusts the focus. Federal prison 28 months. I used to work the front desk of ours for a big hospital. There was a cute elderly gentleman who had been hired for the janitorial staff. I onboarded him and remembered how sweet, kind, and appreciative he was all the time. One day, a few months into his job, he came to the front desk and looked completely different. His light spirit was gone and had been replaced by something much darker. He had come in to set up counseling appointments and proceeded to tell me why. He was on the job when he received a call that a patient had fallen and he needed to go to X spot to help clean it up. That was it. Of course, he didn't realize until he arrived at the scene that the patient had jumped to her death from the top of a 5-story garage building. He was the first person there, totally unprepared for the gruesome scene. No one had warned him of what he would find. No one thought that the poor janitor could been spared from seeing that. My heart still goes out to him. This was 8 years ago. I hope he got lots of counseling and was somehow able to move on with his life. He didn't have to say much for me to understand how deeply traumatized he was. Poor soul. My neighbor knocked on the front door early one morning. We'd never met. He introduced himself and wanted me to know why there might be a lot of cars parked in front of the house. All 3 of his children had died in a car accident the night before. One day during my junior year in high school, back in the 1980s, I came downstairs on a Saturday morning and my mom asked me, "Do you know Bob Johnson?" I said yeah. I sit next to him in English. She turned the local newspaper around and there was Bob on the front page in handcuffs. He had murdered his dad and tried to cover it up. Apparently his dad had been raping him for years and Bob finally had enough. Shot his dad in the head with a .22 while he slept. Fortunately the courts were lenient. They gave him a new identity, moved him out to somewhere in the Midwest, and gave him counseling. I guess this one day ruined his dad's life and saved his own. I saw him on Facebook a couple of years ago. He's using his real name, is married with kids, and working as a driver for one of the big parcel delivery services. I'm so glad his life turned out pretty normal. / not his real name. A guy that I worked with asked to have Friday night off as he was going out of town. Turns out he went to go meet with an underage girl he met on Craigslist that ended up actually being a giant police sting. He was arrested for soliciting a minor. That was probably 6 years ago, and the last I heard he was still locked up. When I was in EMT school we were told about a paramedic student, instructor was a paramedic as well, who observed a stabbing call. They arrive at the bar and see a dude with a knife in his abdomen. Medic student takes lead and pulls the knife out, something you never do as I'm sure you know. Senior medic loses his ducking mind at this dumbus, asking him what the duck he was thinking. Student freaks out and, you guessed it, puts the ducking knife back in. The patient died as a result. Student lost any chance of having a good job, not even just in EMS, and was charged with the death of the patient. Might have been manslaughter, I don't remember. His entire life was ruined because he freaked out and made a mistake on a call. Not a rookie mistake or a common slip up, but in about half a minute he ruined his life. My family, I woke up to the most horrifying screams. Never heard screams like that before, not even in the worst horror films. It was my mother, after being told dad had crashed his bike on the way back to base. I still have nightmares about them, and still break down about my father. It's been 15 years, but the man was my best friend and a great dad. A girl in my class got caught with a thermos full of vodka, and when the teacher caught her, she got sent to the principal's office. Well, when the principal asked her why she was drinking, the girl told him that she had been sleeping with the school resource officer. Dude was a cop stationed at the school having sex with a 10th grader. Got dragged out of the school by officers that worked alongside him. At the court hearing they found out he was having sex with 2 more girls at the school. His wife and 2 kids were in the courtroom to support him because he told them he was innocent. That kinda caved when one of the girls had a video of the 2 of them having sex. When I was like 9 or something, a boy from my class was killed by his mother before she committed suicide. I saw it on the news that night, only to learn it was him the next morning. We all got sat down in like 4th grade, that's about age 9 to 10 here, and told to be extra nice to one boy who was returning to school after being gone. I later found out that his dad had killed his mother and himself in front of the boy. I have no idea how you come back from that, even if the other kids are nice for a few days, but kudos to our school for trying, I guess. Watched a mom and her kid on a boat, escorted by law enforcement back to the dock. Her boyfriend had gone swimming off the boat. The wind pushed the vessel away from him. She didn't know anything about how to turn it on to move it closer. It kept getting farther. He kept swimming harder. He eventually slipped under and was recovered 80 feet down a few days later. I'll never forget the look on her face. Never. He was a 28-year-old airman. Peak health. Wear a life jacket. People, you are not stronger than Mother Nature. And don't leave a boat without someone who can drive it safely. Close bracket. When I was a kid I lived in an apartment complex. One of the families had 3 young kids. One day the parents needed to run some errands, so they hired a babysitter to watch the kids. The babysitter fell asleep, and one of the kids started playing with some matches. The parents came home to huge billowing clouds of smoke and fire coming from all the windows. All 3 kids and the babysitter died. They were only gone for about an hour. I didn't know my biological father. He remarried after my mother dumped him and had 3 kids with his new wife. When the oldest was 12, BO dad and wife left her in charge and went out to the movies or something and came back to a house in flames and 3 dead daughters. When I finally met him decades later, he told me that they smelled gas in the house that morning but didn't do anything about it. So he had to live with that. Mine. When a non-curable rare progressive brain disease was diagnosed. I'm now 51 years old, in the final phase of my life, and my 52th birthday will probably be my last. Not my personal experience, but a national news story. A van full of college students got into an accident and most of them died, but one girl survived with major injuries. She had facial trauma and was hospitalized for weeks. She kept repeating another girl's name as she was recovering. Turns out, she was saying her own name. She and another similarly built, same hair and eye-colored female passenger were mistakenly identified for each other in the aftermath of the crash. Her family had a funeral for her, and the other girl's family were the ones at her bedside before the misidentification was realized. I cannot even imagine the suffering of thinking your daughter was alive for weeks and then learning she'd been dead all along. Or having a funeral for a child who was actually alive and you didn't know. Link, WTHR. Cometiclo crash victims' identities mixed up. Doing an MRI on a 33-year-old healthy man because he was a bit dizzy and finding a golf ball tumor in his brain. Read the radiology report. Google type of tumor. Finding only 5% survive. Edit. I should also say that I do a lot of 30-something-year-olds who come in for head issues and almost every single one of them are fine. My dad used to work at Prudential Financial, and he told me that in the days after Enron stock suddenly dropped to nothing, some of his coworkers just walked around like zombies. Apparently they'd put a ton of money into Enron, and were now completely screwed. That's nuts. Both of my parents worked at Pru. Both lost their jobs when I was in elementary school. I never asked what happened, but it was understood the company had to make major cutbacks. Looking back, it was definitely a difficult time for my mom, dad and us 3 young kids. But they never let on to that fact. Duck, they're great parents. I work as a registered nurse in a hospital in Kentucky. A patient came in through the air raising hell and yelling things like I want to donate my organs. This place sucks. Duck all of you. Etc. Stomped out the front door entrance and a CNA, nurse's assistant, followed him out to attempt at calming him down. He brandished a 45 and blew his brains out in front of the young assistant. He died. Organs couldn't be harvested. And she is in therapy. Like 7-ish years ago, a bunch of the crew chiefs at my guard base were out celebrating one of their own who got his associate's degree. They were all drinking, not a ton, and eventually went home. Except for one guy. He stayed and drank until last call. He decided to drive home. He hit a 20-year-old who was on his way to work at about 2 AM and turned him into a paraplegic. Our wing commander basically told him, plead guilty to the county and go to jail with an administrative discharge. His family would have been able to keep some of his benefits, like the Valone and GI Bill, or fight it, lose, cost his family tons of money, and get a dishonorable. Dishonorable basically is like you never even served. He plead guilty. Edit. Dishonorable like you never served in regards to benefits. Any bonuses you received you have to pay back. Medals are rescinded. It is also listed on job applications, and people will deny you because of it. I know a dishonorable is like a felony, but to do it is a long process, regardless if he got convicted in civilian criminal court. His discharge was a hey, you still have 2 years left in your contract before re-enlistment, so you're just going to resign that right now instead. Also, to the people who think that he got away scot-free, he didn't. He went to jail. Felony DUI and assault with a deadly weapon or something like that. The wing commander only allowed him to do at least one selfless thing and still be able to transfer his GI Bill and Valone to his family. He also had to pay medical expenses for the kid he hit, and probably other damages as well. So it's not like he got a free pass on that. When I was about 13 I was talking with my best friend at a playground on a hill. Suddenly this lady comes racing down on her bike. She's not wearing a helmet, which was unfortunate because her bike slipped from underneath her and she goes flying, smacks her head into a corner. I was too young to know this at the time, but I'm almost certain she died instantly. Wear a helmet. I'm sober 6 years. There was a guy who used to attend meetings in my circle who picked up a drink on a Friday after being sober for more than 2 decades. They found him in the bay on Monday morning. Coworker got caught stealing and got fired. He went home and told his wife, and apparently she had enough and left him and took the kids. Police found him the next morning in the woods deceased. I saw a man's life just crumble in less than 24 hours. Edit. Okay, for some context, when I say steal, I mean close to $100,000 in precious metals from a cushy federal government job. Edit 2. He was going to be arrested and knew it. Also, he killed himself for everyone asking. The first one that pops to mind is one of my coworkers arriving at work sobbing hysterically. It took a while to calm her down to the point where we could understand anything she was saying. I thought she must have been robbed or something, but it turned out she just found love letters in her car from her mother to her husband. All I could think was that if that were me, the last thing I'd do is show up to work and tell everybody, and B, I'd probably drive off a cliff. Or, I don't know, murder my husband? How do you ever recover from that? I mean, if my husband was just having an affair with a chick or another man, I'd just divorce him. But my mother, I could not have. I still think about that. Poor girl. She was such a nice person and did not deserve that. Edit. They were having an affair. It wasn't just that the mom was infatuated and writing to him. This was back in junior high school. Dude sent his nudes to an 8-year-old, him being 12, and the school found out. The cops were involved, and they pulled up to the school, and he left in handcuffs. It also turned out that same 8-year-old that he sent nudes to, he beat her into a coma. Don't know what happened to him. Obviously he had some sort of assault and child pornography charges, but that's all I know. 3 weeks after graduating from high school, a student got drunk at a party and put a knife in another guy's chest. Didn't kill him, but it was a close call. Goodbye adulthood. I've got a related one. I was in the Navy. One of my guys who was a third-class petty officer got into an argument with the chief he was working with in a shitty temporary job. Nobody knows the full story because they were the only 2 people there, but they both had knives and the chief stabbed him in the gut. I knew them both very well, and I'm sure the kid was at fault, but he got a medical discharge and the chief got completely ducked after 17 years of service. I don't know what chief's actual fate was, but I know he was charged, and the other guy wasn't. They were both what I would consider to be good people, but the kid definitely had a chip on his shoulder and the chief seemed like a totally boring, but nice individual with a wife and kids and whatnot. Not a grumpy or hated guy like many others. Edit. Stab guy was fine after surgery. It's been 11 years or so, and he's still posting on Facebook. I liked him too, but he was cocky and young. Yep. At least several times a month we had to take care of a family who learned that their child had cancer that day. Pretty terrible life-altering news. I spent a lot of time distracting kids with boredom escalating while their parents were talking to doctors, crying, and then amazingly pulling it together to continue on.